Our next item is of great interest to all of us. It's going to be a Green Themes presentation by our own Rick Brown, AICP CBSP. Tell us what those letters mean so people understand. There are more letters behind your name than there are in front of your name. And that means that what he's going to tell us, which is he's going to tell us about the Meridian Township Greenspace Plan a decade later after it was made.
Do you want the official version of what AICP means or the unofficial version?
The official, please. This is public TV.
Well, AICP officially means American Institute of Certified Planners. The unofficial is any idiot can plan. But
I've heard that.
well, I've been told that. No. And then CBSP is Certified Business Solutions Professional. So, not that, well, that second one in particular doesn't really have a whole lot to do with today. So, Meridian Township Greenspace Plan. It's hard to believe it's been a decade, but it was reviewed back in the early 2000s and approved or accepted in 2004 and started taking effect basically in late 2004, early 2005. And it's a lengthy document. We have the map or the handout that goes with it on display over here on the tripod. And it basically has several aspects to it. Obviously, that's the shortened version. The fully formatted version comes on a CD and it's quite lengthy. Let me see here. I'm trying to figure out. There we go. So I'm going to violate one of the lessons of Father Streeter from my high school and read exactly what the overhead says here versus saying something different. He was my high school speech teacher, and you were told never to read exactly what it says, but when you're talking about the vision of the Greenspace Plan, I can't really cut corners. But basically the vision was that the Greenspace Plan would provide a network of green spaces and non-motorized linkages that will protect and connect valued natural and cultural resources, provide linkages to adjacent communities, and improve the quality of life for township residents. So pretty lofty vision and goal there. By the way, as we're going through, whenever you see the word green space, as I get further into this document highlighted in green, that means it's something that's consistent with what the Green Space Plan called for. So when we start getting further afield and talking about some of the accomplishments since 2004, whenever it's highlighted in green like that, that's sort of my hidden way of making everybody aware. So there were three primary goals of the Green Space Plan. First one was to identify a network of ecologically and culturally valuable resources to be protected. Secondly was the non-motorized aspect of it. It's not necessarily tied directly to our pathway plan. A lot of it is similar. The pathway plan was established by the Department of Public Works and Engineering after the township passed a millage. The pathways tend to follow, most of the pathways tend to follow along streets. They're basically extra wide sidewalks, although there are some off-road ones as well. The non-motorized aspect of this includes portions of that, such as the interurban trail, but not necessarily all of it. And it also includes suggested additions to it. But basically, the non-motorized portion define an off-road system that links the major destinations, schools, shopping, employment centers, residential areas for both recreation and transportation, and provides opportunities for people of all abilities. So it's not just meant to be, something for top-notch bicyclists. It can be for people that are in wheelchairs. It can be for people that have small children. It can be for people of all ages. And then from an implementation standpoint, the goal was to outline a feasible implementation strategy that provides equitable solutions for all stakeholders, basically for everybody in the township, whether you're a homeowner, business owner, resident, renter, you name it. So what are the key elements of the Greenspace Plan? Please note, chemistry professor, the icon on the top right. Basically, the non-motorized system has a on-road path or non-motorized applications such as shared use paths and foot trails. Off-road, off-road would be shared use paths and then foot trails. The on-road are on or adjacent to roadways. The on-road ones are the most similar to our Meridian Township pedestrian bicycle pathway plan. You go down Okemos Road and you see extra wide sidewalks along both sides. Those are considered on-road pathways. You go down the interurban trail that goes between Bircham and Hazlitt along an old interurban rail line. That's an off-road. Some of the footpaths through the parks might be considered off-road as well. And then you have the intersections of these roads and paths as well. Then you have priority conservation corridors. These are areas where there are green spaces, for lack of a better word, in the township that we want to try to preserve, that allow for wildlife movement, that allow for ecosystems to be healthy versus fragmented, that allow for interconnected greenways between parts of the community. Then there are scenic road corridors. There were a number of them that were identified on the plan. If you look at the plan that's over there by you, they're all shown in sort of an orange color. Portions of Cornell Road, portions of Van Atta Road, portions of Dobie Road, portions of many roads within the township, several roads actually on MSU land in sections 31. And so it didn't necessarily have to be a tree-lined road, although most are, but a road that has scenic vistas, whether it be farms, countryside, water, you name it. For example, the section Dobie Road, it's a fairly short section that's shown as a scenic corridor between Hatch and Kinawa, because you go down through the valley there of the Red Cedar and past the MSU property. Hewlett Road is another example of one of the scenic roads. And then there were areas of special concern. These were areas where we wanted to pay special attention to and special detail to hopefully either repair fragile links between priority conservation corridors. You know, there's a very narrow link or a weakened link of green space that has been impacted by development over time or by agriculture or you name it. And these are the fragile linkages that we want to try to pay special attention to. There are restoration opportunities. Where do we have some places that have been impacted, but we can bring them back through whatever, various means. Controlled burns might be an example. Land preservation purchases would be another example. And then areas of wildlife crossings. Where do we tend to see, wildlife being impacted by roadways, highways, railroads, you name it, and where are these areas where we tend to have the most accidents between wildlife and humans, or the most interaction between wildlife and human that we can try to address. Many of these are along stream corridors, and we'll get into that in a little more in a minute. So implementation tools. Every place you see a green check is something new that's been added since the Greenspace Plan was adopted. We already had conservation zoning with the conservation district, which is basically all the floodplain in the township. We already had at least one conservation easement, and I believe several others that were either set up through the DEQ or the MDNR or in conjunction with both. Since then, we've added trail easements. We've added voluntary stewardship through the land preservation program. We have land acquisition through the land preservation program, whether it be purchase or by the township or donations. And we have linked site plan approvals, where we have site plans that are approvals that are based on aspects of the Greenspace Plan. Not necessarily every site plan, but we do have approvals. Purchase and development rights is really one area that hasn't been fully explored. That's harder to read than I thought it would be, but this basically shows all the land preservation properties that have been acquired since 2004, totaling 523 acres, which I believe is more than 50% of the total, if I'm not mistaken. This includes everything from the Northwest Preserve to the Riseburg Preserve, also now known as the Central Meridian Uplands, all the way down to the Red Cedar River East Preserve, and they range anywhere from 2004 to 2011. The actual acquisition of properties has slowed down since 2011, not necessarily because there aren't properties to obtain, it's just more that the program has morphed over time. And we still get some offers, and I believe Commissioner Cabasso regularly deals with that as a member of the Land Preservation Board. But there's not as many as there were before. We sort of, acquired in one manner or another a lot of them that we were hoping to obtain. The ones that are shown in green, which is the vast majority, are ones that were called out on the Greenspace Plan. So that's all but 2 of them listed there were in some manner shown on the Greenspace Plan. So I think that's staying very consistent with it, and it's a great tool for helping guide us. Then we've added several parks since 2004. Of those, the additional acreage at Ted Black Woods is the only one that matches with the Greenspace Plan, and that's partially because of the nature of the other 2. Towner Road Park used to be Applegate driving range, and the township acquired that when it closed. So since it was a golf driving range at the time, it probably didn't show up as something that might be possible to add to the Greenspace Plan when the Greenspace Plan was being prepared. Same thing with Newton Road Park. That was a piece of land that the township had acquired at one time in the long distance past to put a fire station. Obviously, there's not a fire station there, but now there is a soccer field there. That's right at the corner, by the way, at Lake Lansing and Newton Road on the northeast corner. So those 2 might not have been called out on the Greenspace Plan specifically because of what their purpose was at the time. So, but we are trying, obviously Parks has been consistent in adding land within the greens that was shown on the Greenspace Plan. The other 2 just happen to be unique situations. Shared use trails since 2004. Phase 2 of the Interurban Trail. Phase 1 was open from Bircham to Okemos Road. Phase 2, Okemos Road to Marsh, has since been added. And that's consistent with the Greenspace Plan. Nancy Moore Park, there's a number of trails that have been added in Nancy Moore Park. Nancy Moore Park obviously is green space, but it wasn't called out separately by the Greenspace Plan. Remember, we're talking about more wild, shall we say, lands or undeveloped lands. Nancy Moore Park was already developed as a park. And then the old Raby Road connector, where Raby Road sort of turns into Bayonne there at that 90-degree turn near Wildflower Estates. That's consistent with the Greenspace Plan. Smith Drain, that was one that was proposed that was going to be built north and south in Section 33. Unfortunately, that had a variance denied, so it was never actually constructed. And then Wanch Park, the recent trail, roughly 0.4 of a mile trail in there, is another recent shared use trail. All very beneficial to the community and the citizens of the community. They just don't happen to directly link up with what was called for in the Greenspace Plan. They indirectly do, but not directly. And if you see any polar bears on cross-country skis around here, tell me about it. Trail easements. these are easements within certain developments that may help link to our pathway system, our trail system, or link between, either act as a conduit between them or a link directly to them. Georgetown subdivision has areas that were set aside as trail easements. There are connections to the interurban trail from several subdivisions. Just last year, Keystone Woods there was is on the south side of the trail, and a bridge was completed linking that subdivision to the interurban trail. It had to be built over the adjacent drain to do so. And I personally use that all the time, and it's a very nice access. So those are all, both of those situations are consistent with the plan. There's also a link that was put in between the Okemos-Hewlett Road pathway to Robbins Way for people to access that pathway from the south. That one's not called out specifically on the Greenspace Plan, but it meets all the criteria of it. Scenic road corridors, we have a bunch of them. I mentioned a few earlier. College Road, Cornell Road, portions of Cornell, Dobie, Hagedorn Road, Hewlett Road, Lake Drive, Meridian, portions of Meridian Road, Mount Hope, Piper, Powell, Raby, Shoesmith, Tyhart east of Powell, and Van Atta. Those are all very special roads in Meridian Township that everybody, most everybody holds near and dear to their heart when they drive down them. They go, this is one of the reasons I love living here, is seeing these tree canopies or these vistas or these, views that we have along these roads. Go back for a second. Didn't like my go back, so I'll stay where I am. Those roads, when we review projects along those roads, we try to take in special consideration the fact that they're scenic roads. Just recently, we had a case where we had a homeowner wanting to build a home on Hewlett Road, and it was on a lot that was a meets and bounds parcel versus a platted parcel. And because of that, it's subject to the land clearing ordinance. And one of the conditions we put on their land clearing permit was that the trees along, the large, beautiful trees along Hewlett Road could not be cut down. They could be trimmed, dead wood and things like that, but they could not be cut down. And that was in an attempt to maintain that visual aesthetic along Hewlett Road, that canopy, the aesthetics that brought people there in the first place. So, whoops, well, I accidentally hit that, and I'm not sure how to go back on it here. The previous one,
Left arrow?
Left arrow
left arrow is the one that's taking me to it.
or the up arrow?
Let's see. Thank you. I'm used to doing this with a mouse, not with a So, wildlife crossings. This has been an interesting topic. Not always successful. We've had a couple of successes. The Greenspace Plan calls out that there should be wildlife crossings at key points within the township, particularly along drains and rivers and streams, where animals can get across or underneath the road without having to cross the road and becoming roadkill or a hood ornament. It's not like it was intended that special tunnels were going to be built or anything like that. It was more when we are updating these stream crossings that this be taken into consideration. We've had a couple of successes. Hannah Boulevard over the Hannah Farms drain. It's a box culvert, a very large box culvert. A deer or other significant animal could get through there. Van Atta Road over the Red Cedar River, we had some success in that as well. On the other side, we've had some failures. Dobie Road over the Red Cedar, that was really the first instance where this came up after the plan was approved. And because of that, it was sort of the the guinea pig, shall we say. Some challenges came up with that because of the way the fencing was designed, some challenges because of the way the underneath crossing. It's certainly high enough above the river where you could get underneath it, but not necessarily all animals are big enough or strong enough to walk through the river, and some animals need to be able to get under the bridge without having to go through the water. So there was a lot of discussion when the Dobie Road Bridge was being replaced on trying to address that. Was it successful? Maybe partially, but it wasn't the success we probably hoped for or the plan hoped for. Hagedorn Road over the Red Cedar River, and Mount Hope over Heron Creek, those are probably also could be considered failures, although the Hagedorn Road Bridge is certainly high enough, but there's not a whole lot of shoreline or bank there for smaller animals. And Mount Hope Avenue, Mount Hope, if you drive along there, sort of dips when it gets to the Heron Creek drain, and because of that, the culvert's not particularly high. That would have taken a lot of additional fill and construction to raise it up high enough to put in a large culvert for larger animal movement underneath there. So, it's some successes but some failures in relation to the Greenspace Plan. How has it been applied? How have we been applying the Greenspace Plan in the last 10 years? Well, we apply it in many reviews. Rezoning requests, special use permits, plats, planned unit developments, mixed use plan unit developments, commercial planned unit developments, land clearing permits, and those wetland use permits that require hearing. Some smaller wetland use permits don't necessarily require hearing, so there's not a staff report that's typically prepared with those. In terms of areas for improvement, the greatest weakness of the Greenspace Plan is the fact that it's a plan. It's not an ordinance. You can say this is what we would like to do, but we can't, and I'm going to use a word that I don't mean it to sound worse than it is, we can't force you to do it or or compel you to do it. We can, ask you to do it, but we can't compel you to do it. So in that regard, it doesn't have regulatory teeth. It's hard to enforce and apply as there's nothing codified, and it requires its use. So it's not being used largely, and I'm going to say largely because there's certain situations where it certainly is, for site plan review, for when the township's doing its capital improvements program, when doing utility infrastructure planning, park planning, other than maybe acquisition, and the budgeting process. Now, it's also often dismissed as too expensive to conform to. If you're just adding another layer of regulatory requirements for us to have to follow. And then there's a lack of understanding outside the township offices, not necessarily by the general public, but when we're dealing with other organizations that impact Meridian Township, whether it be the roads or whether it be developers of properties in the township. Some of them know what it's all about and understand it. Not necessarily all. But I would say, the road commission or the road department and the MDOT, are often surprised by it, even though, we've brought it up before. Doesn't mean education doesn't work, but I don't think their worldview is the same as our worldview. That's the best way to put it. And then, in terms of conclusions, what we could draw from all of this? The Greenspace Plan is certainly beneficial, but application of it is somewhat inconsistent. It's most useful for land preservation situations and non-motorized projects. it is clearly a great guide for those. Truthfully, the momentum probably has faded since its adoption. After 10 years, a lot of people that were involved in its adoption either aren't on boards or commissions or aren't living in the township or whatever. So, and I'm not saying that it's not being used, it's just that when it's fresh and new, there's kind of a wow factor. And now that it's a little bit older, it perhaps has become maybe somewhat dated even because of that. It risks becoming just another plan gathering dust, and that's often a case when plans get older. If they're not regularly updated, some of the things that they represent, public opinion may have changed on them, or there may have been a development that alters an aspect of it. Or some of the things that have been completed may open up new opportunities. So it's something that needs to be looked at on a regular basis. We have one of the planning commissioners here this evening. The general goal is that master plans be looked at every 5 to 10 years. Well, this is a plan also. And if you let it sit around too long, it gets outdated in the fact that what's on the ground doesn't necessarily match what's, was used to develop the plan. It's very often used for individual specific development proposals and projects. But reviewing it compared to macro situations, it tends to get left out. Macro meaning like when you're talking, big picture items, township-wide impact type things, whether it be, I'm trying to give you a good example. Well, it could be things that, in terms of the greening mid-Michigan plan, or that the Tri-County had done, or when you're talking I don't know if it got brought up at all during the discussion of the Grand River Corridor, or the BRT. Granted, Grand River's not necessarily an area where you're going to see a lot of green space, but those are all macro projects that affect the entire township that maybe the Greenspace Plan should be discussed in certain aspects related to it. Another example would be when you're doing the capital improvements plan for the township. When you're deciding where to spend money on capital improvement projects, I don't think the Greenspace Plan's ever been considered as part of that, other than money being spent for the land preservation program, and maybe pathways as well. For it to be fully effective, it needs teeth or codification. Maybe not in its entirety, but those aspects that we treasure the most, that we think have the most benefit, are areas that we might want to consider codifying. Re-education efforts. That's not because people aren't supportive of it. There's a lot of people that just don't know about it. There are people that are on planning commissions and maybe environmental commissions and other boards and commissions in the township that weren't on those in 2004 or 5, and maybe don't even know we have such a document. It also is helpful for those being hired, new employees within the township, to bring them up to speed on it as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be planning employees. There's lots of departments that impact land use in Meridian Township. And then lastly, it should be updated fairly soon, and like I was saying before, to reflect new ideas, new trends, and changes on the ground. It's a plan should be a living document, not something that's written and filed away for posterity. It's supposed to be a living document that's routinely updated, on a regular basis, so that it can be a viable document that can be applied to real-world situations as time moves on. So that's my summary. I will try to answer any questions you have, and I appreciate the time. John.
Could you give us some idea, if the township was going to update the plan, I assume that would be a significant undertaking?
Yes.
And would it be a staff undertaking or a citizen task force or a mix of the two or consultants?
It would depend. It would depend. First of all, when the Greenspace Plan was prepared, there was a consultant, the Greenway Collaborative out of Ann Arbor, that did a lot of the legwork, along with a committee of staff members, probably 10 or 12 of us on that committee, that worked together on it, and we would gather the information and provide it to them, and they'd put the document together and such. That's obviously, if you do it that way, again, that's a large expenditure of money, and would have to be something that would be budgeted, and it would be the township board deciding whether or not, and the township manager in unison, deciding whether the funds are there to do that. If it's done internally, yes, there's going to be a cost. It's more of a cost that's built into the fixed costs of staff salaries and things like that. It certainly can be done that way. It can be done that way as a joint program between staff and boards and commissions. But in the end, there has to be the buy-in by the elected officials on whether they want to proceed with that. There's priorities. Each year they set priorities, and it's our task as staff and boards and commissions to follow through with the priorities set by them. We can propose other priorities. There can be amendments to goals and objectives, or of each year, but it's mainly getting it on the radar and proceeding from there. But yes, there would be. If it was something done like last time, there would be a significant cost, and that would be that would be something that would have to be weighed in terms of, do we have the monies right now for such a update? If it's something done internally, that can be sort of blended in with the ongoing costs.
Could I follow up on that?
Real quick? Sure, go ahead.
On that point,
That's
it's really, really, really useful to have the point-by-point lists of accomplishments and remaining actions. And I wonder, we're just talking about a complete sort of overhaul of the plan as one option. Maybe an interim step or a first step could be to take what you've done and maybe translate that to the maps that appear in the report. And that, I think, would be a really powerful way for more folks to appreciate just what it is that has been accomplished so far, and where the remaining pieces are. And it occurs to me that that's, it's not a trivial mapping exercise, but it's something that, if these data are available in-house, fine. If we have to ask the consultant to update those, they still have the data, it doesn't feel to me like too onerous a task.
Right. Another way is doing a piecemeal approach of tackling certain aspects of the Greenspace Plan at a time, whether it be tackling the priority conservation corridors or the non-motorized part, or the,
Right.
So.
I'd like to note that there are a couple things that you didn't mention. One of them is that the Greenspace Plan is, or maybe you mentioned it, but it's online, so anybody can see it. Anybody who's seen this presentation can go and find it. And one of the things that I think you sort of implied, but there's a list right here on page 49, I guess it is. It says, it lists off the meetings that were held to put this thing together, and it was quite an endeavor. There were, I see 8 meetings listed, and the content and summaries of those meetings are given then in the following pages, with also mention of the participants, including Rick. So that all happened sort of the first few days of each month in 2003. clearly this was a significant effort. This wasn't just a few people putting down a bunch of nice ideas and drawing up some pretty maps. Some really serious thought went into this. And so the question is, if you're going to redo it, the fact that there's a skeleton here, a framework within which such a thing was already developed, the question is how much easier, or is it a bigger challenge because you want to do better this time, or is it a smaller challenge because you've already got a framework in place and the issue is now we can adapt what we already have?
My first inclination, it would be easier.
Yeah, I would have thought so too, but I just want to highlight how...
I mean, you're not reinventing the wheel, you're improving upon it, I guess.
But there were, I don't know, how many public workshops did you hold? I mean, as I flipped through it, I read this in detail a long time ago, and now, I should have last night, but of course,
I
things
don't
got away from
recall.
me.
It's been, a decade now. It's like,
But a bunch of public workshops as well, where you got public insight or suggestions and so forth to build ideas on this. And so it seems to me that's the other part that would be important, is to not lose that asset. That is to say, try to again, kind of in the same way that the charrettes had gone on for talking about the Grand River Corridor and so forth, to remind the public that these kinds of things can happen at all, and also that we should be thinking about how we live in our community and how our community is evolving, and what happens if we don't pay attention. I don't know. I was just curious how the sort of planning for the planning got put together.
well, you're taxing my memory. Let's put it that way.
A series of meetings got planned. A series of public information sessions and discussion sessions happened. Somehow the word was gotten out. People were gathered. Ideas were gathered.
Oh yeah, I mean,
but it couldn't have been willy-nilly.
no, it wasn't. I mean, each staff participant in this was regularly assigned information to gather and to provide to the consultants so that they could put it into this document as well as into the map, or try to find the resources if we didn't have it readily available. So it was a constant effort to do that. We met regularly to go over the document and review it and fly spec it and you name it. And so it was an in-depth effort that involved many parties.
I'd say that's a pretty high level of detail, getting your specifications all the way down to the flies.
Yeah.
So another question I had was, so you mentioned a number of assets that have been acquired or developments that have been made that were called out in it, and I'm just wondering, in terms of proportions, I don't know, let's go back to the one that was mostly green, which was, I guess, non-motorized. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Well,
there were
the preserved lands since
preserved lands.
2004.
So, okay, so there are, whatever, 12 or 15 here. What fraction of the items that actually were called out in the report does this represent? I mean, is this most
Oh,
of...
I didn't calculate that out. But because I would need to know all the various. Well, I would either need to know the total acreage or all the different parcels. I was just trying to give an example or a basic idea of the plan has been helpful in identifying those lands that we wanted to preserve, and a useful tool in that.
Right, and that's
And I think
that's fantastic.
Jim
I'm just
can correct
curious
me if I'm
about
wrong,
what...
but I think that's more than 50% of the total acreage of land preservation property, isn't it? 523 acres.
Sounds
Yeah,
about right.
that's more than half.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that 523 acres is the one shown in green, not all of these, just the ones.
Just the ones in green.
Right.
No, I was just
Why
curious.
do you have these separated, though? Why do you not have the rest of the land preserved preserves listed here?
Because I'm only doing the ones since the Greenspace Plan was adopted.
Okay.
Because prior to that, it wouldn't have been used as a tool for helping decide that.
Okay.
So my question was basically just what fraction of the actual, shopping list, if you want to put it that way, does this represent?
That would be totally a
I was
guess.
suggesting that a map update would be useful, because
Exactly.
once you do go and outline which parcels have been acquired and which ones are still in red,
Right.
right? Then you'll know.
Right. That's what I was curious about. I mean, I'm not trying to be critical of the presentation. I'm just looking for sort of to put it in a little bit more complete context.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Any other questions?
Rick, you've made a good case that while the plan has been helpful and has some accomplishments, it could be more effective and really isn't required. I would guess that make it a requirement for everything is not feasible for a whole bunch of reasons. I wonder if there's certain areas, though, that it kind of makes sense as a starting point for where maybe it would be a requirement. You mentioned capital improvement projects, maybe something under the control of the township that could be it kind of just makes sense that it would be a requirement.
Well, obviously, land use decisions is a no-brainer. I think land preservation acquisition is a no-brainer. Off-road pathways, absolutely. Beyond that, it gets a little fuzzier. I mean, certainly some park decisions would make sense. Not necessarily ones that are in urban areas, but more acquiring new park or additional parkland in less developed areas, shall we say. Capital improvements, where are you going to spend your money on your infrastructure? Should you gear your expenditures towards areas that are already developed versus extending it outward into areas that are called for protection or preservation? Should you try to make it as efficient as possible in terms of those expenditures? One thing I want everybody to sort of think about related to this is too often this plan or environmental regulations in general are thought as a hindrance to development, when in reality they're an economic development tool, because they are protecting the things that drew people here in the first place. They are protecting the things that we all hold near and dear to our hearts. And while some may see that as an impediment, it's also a way of drawing additional investment in the community, because people want to live there, people want to shop there, people want to recreate there, people want to go to school there. It's not it's not a I'm trying to think of the analogy and the word's not coming to me, but it's not a all or none situation. Preserving this land makes other lands in the community more valuable, because if somebody owns a home next to one of these preserved lands, the value goes up, because somebody who wants to live there, they don't have to worry about a subdivision going behind their home, or they can enjoy wildlife, or they don't have to worry about any other developments and things like that. It also focuses your investments in capital improvements in those areas that are already developed or that make sense to develop in the future, versus extending it out further into areas far afield, which drives your costs up at trying to extend them out to greenfield sites, so to speak. So I like to think of this, the Greenspace Plan, and all the amenities that come with it, because the people, when they choose a place to live, they choose it based on things like schools, things like parks, things like trails, things like shopping opportunities. It's the amenities that draw people to a place. And if you enhance your amenities, you're doing economic development. You're not doing growth control or whatever. I mean, yes, it's that to a certain degree, but you're not trying to stymie growth or be overly regulatory. You're trying to create a different type of economic development, one that is beneficial to the entire community. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, or if I've got wordy there.
Things like the interurban certainly were a development of a kind, but they also, make that particular. They give people access in a different way, and they support a different fraction of the population.
Well,
who are
I'll give you,
interested in-
yes, they do, and they also bring up property values. I'll give you a perfect example. I was at a meeting a month ago. There's a gentleman, and this isn't in Meridian Township. There's a gentleman I know who's involved in trail development who lives in Chelsea, and he said just outside of Chelsea in the Dexter area, there's a 5-mile long trail that's gone in recently between Dexter and North Territorial Road. And there's one particular subdivision there in Dexter that it is near the trail, and home prices have gone up like 30 to 60% in a single year because of that trail. And he knows that because he's tried to buy lots out there, a lot out there, and or a home, and the prices keep going up. And the realtors are telling them they can't keep the homes on the market more than a few days because of the popularity and access to that trail. Another example, in Indianapolis, my hometown, the Monon Trail, which goes through from Indianapolis north to Carmel and places like that, after that was put in, homes along or near that trail were fetching beachfront property prices because people wanted to be there.
Well, not only that, I've ridden that trail. There are a bunch of cool little restaurants that clearly wouldn't really have critical mass if they weren't accessed by people along the trail, because they're not really on road front and they're not even the style that would appeal to somebody just driving by. But yeah,
Right.
that was
Same
very impressive,
thing.
that.
The University of Cincinnati did a study about trails using, I think it was the Little Miami Scenic Trail in Ohio. They found the exact same thing. So these types of benefits, preserving green space, providing non-motorized access, preserving wildlife, those are the things that can act as economic development tools. They're not meant to be a hard and fast, imposition we're posing on people or businesses. It's meant to be something that enhances the community, that is an economic development tool.
So you said it has no teeth, but is there no way to at least ensure that it gets built into the process of reviewing any choices, whether it's at the planning commission level or at the ZBA level? I mean, is it possible to just ensure that it's these issues are brought up as part of they're just automatically in the
they certainly
agendas?
are in most planning aspects.
Okay.
It would need more of a top-down or a unified approach for it to be applied across the board, per se, in all situations. I don't think it's something that planning can say, well, you have to do this. If it's just a plan, we can certainly request they do that, but I think it's going to take something more of higher authority than me or even the planning director to say this is going to apply to all situations across the board.
Right.
Especially if it's not something that's codified. We can
Well, I guess
certainly
that's what I was
ask,
wondering. Are there communities in the country where there are models that do have a little more
Oh, sure.
of the force of ordinance or whatever?
Sure. Yeah, there are. Don't ask me to cite them right off the top of my head, but there are.
One area that you mentioned where there had been some success was in implementation was the notion of conservation zoning. And you mentioned the floodplains, which is already an existing federal and state regulations on developments in that
conservation
area.
district here.
But that's not the limit of conservation zoning possibilities
Oh, no,
within the
not by any
township.
means.
It's entirely possible for the township to initiate additional overlays
Certainly.
in keeping with the high priority areas in the township. So,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, where I lived in Maryland before moving to Michigan, there were agricultural lands that were preserved, and there were mountains that were preserved. Granted, we don't have mountains here, but you know, it's not something that has to be just floodplain.
and you also mentioned at the site plan approval stage that there are certain instances where these provisions are taken into consideration and others where they're not.
Right.
So that seems like another place where the provisions of this plan could be codified in ordinance or other township regulation that would then require their consideration in a site plan review, rather than it being an optional, suggested, recommended. Would that necessarily be in an ordinance, or are there other ways?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be in an ordinance. It could be sort of a, standard operating procedure, so to speak, within the department. There's going to be certain situations where, if you have a site plan review in downtown Okemos, most likely there's not going to be anything related to the Greenspace plan that would come up on the radar. And, that is one where you wouldn't need to. But if you're doing a development along Old M78 or out on East Grand River or something like that, then very well could come up.
But at the moment, for instance, when there is a special use permit that's being discussed in the township, a planning commission review might or might not choose to refer to the Greenspace plan in reviewing that
Well, the staff will include it in the
Special use
staff
permit.
report. Whether the planning commission latches onto that and says, this is an issue we think needs to be addressed, that would be their call on that.
So that there's already an operating procedure whereby the staff review the Greenspace plan in their
Staff
review
reports
of a
that go to the
special use
planning
permit?
commission include a copy of that segment of the Greenspace plan for that particular site and the surrounding area, as well as some text that identifies what the aspects are.
Wow, that's very good. So that's routine.
Yes.
Okay.
That's been routine since it was approved.
Okay. Oh, that's very good.
Well, I'd be interested in seeing what we can do to help the process move forward, to at least update the maps and maybe consider a more thorough review or updating of the plan. I'm not sure how that would best happen, but maybe at least at our next meeting, if we could hear the feasibility of having that done in-house and whether it would actually require engaging the consultant again. Are the data available? Does this township have the staff resources to accomplish that, or would it require some consulting fees?
Yeah, so
It
the
seems like a
question
good
is,
step
who
to
do we
me.
ask, and how do we find out? I mean, can you investigate those things, Rick, or do you know the answers to those questions right now?
For 2015. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
For 2015, the budget was already approved by the board back in October. It includes money for updating the master plan. It does not include money for updating the Greenspace plan. I doubt, without necessarily a major rewriting of the budget, at least that line item, that it would be something that could get on during the 2015 budget cycle. But it might be something as we look at the 2016, which actually 2016 budget cycle discussions on that start in May. So
The first question was, is that something that could be accomplished in-house, or does it require going to a consultant?
I guess that would be a call of the planning director and the township manager to determine whether there's enough staff time available for that, and I can't make that call myself.
Can you ask?
I can certainly raise the question, sure.
So So I note that at least the plan that's on the web, the master plan that's on the web is dated 2005. So presumably, since the Greenspace plan had more or less just been done the year before, maybe plus
Yeah,
a little.
other than the master plan is the official plan for the township. Okay, and generally state planning enabling legislation requires it to be updated on a regular basis. There's no separate enabling legislation for green space plans. It's sort of a special plan, shall we say, that sort of falls outside the boundaries of I don't know, not outside the boundaries of planning law, but outside the boundaries of your standard planning practices.
The only reason I raise it, though, is that the good thing about that was that the Greenspace plan had just been built the year before, so at least, hopefully, at the time of putting together the master plan, it was still echoing in people's consciousness. Whereas, if
I would agree.
If the master plan is going to be updated now for 2015, in 2015, and then afterwards we sort of say, well, now we'll concentrate on the Greenspace plan. It seems like you wouldn't have the ideal sequencing.
I understand that, and that's a concern you can raise, but I don't know if that would necessarily change the course.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions?
No. I think, just raising the question about whether that can be incorporated through in-house would be getting it on the radar. You obviously have a planning commissioner who's in attendance this evening. Maybe he could note to the planning commission that maybe some aspects of the green space plan should be more fully incorporated into the master plan as it's being updated. That might, that's another way to look at it, is since they're updating the master plan, perhaps some aspects of the green space plan can be
Are you willing
delved
to do
into that.
Right, the Greenspace, the Greenspace plan represents two things, right? One is a huge philosophical commitment, and the other is a lot of technical details about specific opportunities for various ways of either increasing or protecting the assets of the community. But just, I think, in the process of updating the master plan, if that philosophical perspective can be kept in mind, that would even that alone would be a big help. Recognizing that the community made that significant investment 10, 11 years ago, acknowledging these values, and therefore remembering them, hopefully, in the process of updating the master plan, that would, I think, all by itself be a healthy thing. But yeah, I think if we could possibly do the map updates. Seems like the maps are the most concrete collections of data that have evolved a lot and could be brought up to date, at least, even with a magic marker.
Well, another option you could consider is annually they update the non-motorized bicycle pedestrian pathway plan, and they're always looking for input on, where should we make improvements or additions, etc. Well, suggest aspects of the green space plan that would be applicable.
Well, the one that's on the web, the pedestrian bicycle one, is still pretty old. It doesn't show the new section of the interurban.
Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that's not on the plan, and it has been completed, as we all know.
No,
It just means the map that's on there hasn't been upgraded recently
yeah, that's what I mean.
or updated.
What's available to the public is still. In fact, I can't see a date on this map. Oh, 08. It looks like it was 08.
Well, I know we have more recent ones than that.
Oh. So maybe.
Another good request to see if that most recent map could be
Yeah.
made available online.
Yeah, I mean, what's on the web is what the public can look at, so.
Or, yeah, online, they could also come into the office and see the more updated ones too. Or we can mail them a copy.
Okay. But I mean, if it's on this township website, and then you say, well, if you really want the information, you got to come into the office, what's the point of having it on the website? Yeah. I mean, if there's updating to be done as far as that goes, I would urge that could be done. I think we would all urge that, I would hope. Any other questions for Rick? Is there any way that we can encourage, for example, the Planning Commission to hear this same presentation or to review it as it was made tonight?
It'll be on HOMTV for the oil on the web stream for quite a while.
Right. I found it very valuable, and I think I would hope other commissions would too.
I'll have to up my speaking fees.
That's right. So you can subsidize the fees. Okay. Any other questions? John's here for the public. Do you have any comments?
Hi, I'm John Scott Craig. I'm not here to represent the Planning Commission, but I am a Planning Commissioner. I will be, we have a Commissioner comment section in our meeting, which will be next Monday, and I will be reporting on what went on here tonight. So I will pass along some of your requests. So.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.